I get excited to speak, but then I have no words because I feel like every time my brothers speak, I don't even, like, I have never met these men before. And I feel like I've known you since the day I was born.
Yeah.
Like, this is, and the sad reality is we are not discussing the beauties of our culture. We are not discussing the celebratory nature of the voices of African American people. We are not discussing the beauty of dance as it flows out of our culture. We are discussing pain. And I can finish your sentences. And we are from different parts of the country. I love y'all. I love the church. And I'm saying these things because I want the white church to be prophetic in this moment. But I'm also saying these things because I'm mad that I feel the pain of these men and that their descriptions, that my name could now be Art Hooker. My name could be James Carter. My name could be David Rameau. My name could be John Lincoln. My name could be Brother Gardner, was it? Sorry, who left earlier. I'm mad that that's the case, but Prashan, thank you for this, brother.
For the past, was it 7-8 years now, we've been looking at like video footage of guys getting shot, getting killed. You know, I mean, innocent men, unarmed men.
Sometimes running away.
Oh my God, it's just like over and over again. And sometimes, you know, the guys are getting taps on the wrist, you know, as a repercussion of that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I just, as a black man driving down the street, I've been pulled over. It's just, I'm almost conditioned to the possibility of being pulled over. But then there's also the thought when I see this over and over again, and Lord forbid, you can't help but to think, is this my turn to become that martyr for the cause? You know what I mean? You see those lights flashing, and it's just you're automatically, as a black man, conditioned to, okay, let me make sure I don't move too quickly. Let me make sure my hands are, you know what I mean?
But too many people live in the world as it ought to be, but they don't live in the real world that is. And if you don't live in the real world that is, you will never, ever grow into the world as it ought to be. So I'll shut up on this, guys, but there's something about radical truth-telling that I can't wait to talk about, because that's one of the biggest things for me when I think of the next generation, even my own generation, that we have to be okay telling uncomfortable truths, because there is no reconciliation where we're talking about healing, repairing, and transforming. None of that can happen if we're not telling the truth about the facts on the ground. We want to live in the world from an aspirational standpoint, which is a convenient way of saying we don't want to deal with what the world really is like, because quite frankly, there are too many of us that actually benefit off the world staying the way that it is, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. When they pull you over, you have to know how to be careful on how to find out why they pulled you over. Mm-hmm. And this has been like, and so here's the thing, when we watch someone get strangled on video or watch someone get shot and they're clearly unarmed, the reason why that is mind-blowing us, because we know how easily that could happen to us.
Like, they'd find one black guy that was everything they were talking about, and he would be the billboard for all black people. And I was like, you can't do that. In the same way, I wouldn't let, my black people look at one white guy and say, that's how they all are. I was like, we need to give each other's grace.
Love God and love your neighbor. Really love your neighbor. Not try to make your neighbor into you, but love your neighbor as they are.
Yep.
And so I think this is a great opportunity for that on so many levels to really care for the neighbor.
The purpose is, if you see this and you're moved by it, but you're stopping there, you even acknowledge it, but if you stop there, you might as well never acknowledge it in the first place. We're needing change. We're needing action. This is not the liberal media trying to brainwash you. This is not the initiative of a political party trying to tell you you're wrong. This is no conspiracy. This is your own people who've never met each other, sharing from the depths of their heart and completing each other's sentences because their story is the same. if that doesn't reveal to you structural racism and injustices that need to be corrected now, I don't know what will. And that is the mandate of a new generation. Whatever happened in the past is different, but what will you do now? And that is the key thing. You know, there were good people during slavery who did nothing about it. There were good people during Jim Crow laws who did nothing about it. But now the question is, what will the good people today do about it? And don't try to wiggle your way out of an uncomfortable situation and hoping it'll go away and hoping that you'll find a way to look good in this, because none of us look good. We're all sinners. But to acknowledge it and say, Lord, how do I change this legacy? And not be known for living through that and doing nothing and trying to find a cheap way to justify all this and move forward. Greetings and welcome to the Global Unites and USA Unites webinar series. As we all know, it's been an extremely difficult and turbulent time in the United States following the murder of George Floyd and multiple cases like that where police brutality has shone light onto a deeper issue that many have been discussing and wanting to be seen acknowledged in broader society, and that issue is the issue of structural racism. And so today, when many people talk to us as a movement, as Global Unites, on peace building and what are solutions for the US, our answer always is that for every country's conflicts and divisiveness, solutions come from within. Outsiders can come and support, but the reality is that solutions are within their own country. That's our belief and principle in every country we engage in. And more often than not, the solutions have to be led by communities that have experienced injustice and oppression, and predominantly in minority settings, because they have dealt with the issue head on, and therefore they understand what steps need to be taken to eradicate that challenge, how society can be changed and transformed. They have the expertise for that. So in the case of the United States, my firm belief is that if there is going to be long-term change and transformation, the Black community, African American churches, and also other civil rights leaders, civil society leaders, and activists are going to have to play a crucial role for the broader country to understand what the challenges are and what steps need to be taken. So if you're serious about it, it's important that, number one, you acknowledge that there is something deeper than isolated incidents of some people being racist. There is a systematic issue that continues to unjustly torment certain communities based on either the color of their skin or where they live or their socioeconomic background. But secondly, if you want to see change, it's important to listen to leaders in the Black community who have been engaging in peace building, but also are very aware about the challenges of their communities. So today, we have 6 amazing men who have committed their life for the cause of peace building and justice in their society. And so we had the privilege of talking to them. I've had the privilege of knowing them as friends and learning from them. But I thought it was important for us to dig deeper into a conversation given the current reality. The interesting thing is most of the people here have never met. This is our first time for them to meet each other, but they're going to share their insights and how they believe change could happen by first acknowledging that there is structural changes that need to take place. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panel. We have Pastor Leon Stevenson, who's based in Michigan. We've got Pastor John Laking, based in Columbia, South Carolina. We have Pastor Jay Garner, based in Philly, in Pennsylvania. And then we also have Art Hooker from Texas, who also happens to be on our board of directors for Global Unites. And we have David Ramon, who is a state trooper serving in Massachusetts. And we have James Carter in Illinois, Chicago, who is a professional musician. So all of them have amazing insights to share, but part of their life is they have engaged and interacted across racial lines all their life, and they've tried to be bridge builders. So let's hear their story.
I was raised in the hood of East Cleveland, moved to a suburb of that hood that had a very diverse community in high school. And for some reason, God placed in me a passion for seeing people unite while not letting go of the beauty of my Blackness. My friends nicknamed me Blackham X when I was young because I was like so militant, you know, like, yeah. And so God did something in me as a youngster, where He placed this desire for reconciliation within my heart, and I always kind of operated in these two separate worlds: the worlds of my black friends and the worlds of my white friends, and those worlds never came together. In college, never came together, and as I was finishing grad school, the Lord placed on my heart that I was discipling men and trying to see men and women grow in Christ and leading Bible studies and stuff. And I was spending more time doing that than even my graduate studies. So as I was finishing, the Lord placed on my heart, you're going to have no greater passion and desire than serving me full time. And so I kind of backed up and was like, man, this whole time I'm prepared to do some graduate work, but the Lord's calling me. And before I knew it, I found myself on the Eastern Shore out in, or not Eastern Shore, that's Maryland, but out in Boston, kicking it on the North Shore, and was at this seminary, Gordon Conwell, but had the opportunity to work at Gordon College. And I didn't realize there, but what was happening was like the beautiful blackness of my community was being like slowly sucked out through my educational steps. Even in a mixed culture of my high school, the dominant culture was white.
Yeah.
And so to give you, so you can get Black History Month, then I go to undergrad, same thing happens where you get these little expressions of yourself, but learn how to conform, how to conform. So I'm in seminary, and one professor mentioned something about the Black impact of, or the Black representation throughout the history of Christianity. And he was my missions professor that is now a Dr. Timothy Tennant, who's now a president of a seminary. And once he started kind of like opening that door, it sparked something in me. But honestly, I went through two kind of journeys of rage. The first journey was one where I was mad at the Black church because it wasn't like these 10 things that I thought the perfect church should be like, and they were all white. And so I was critiquing my own people with this like fervor. Why don't we have education? And then I had to wake up from that false reality. And then I got mad at the white church. Look at how y'all held us back for all this time. And so I took a stone, threw it at my own people. Then I took a stone and threw it at another group that was created in God's image. And it's probably been a journey of the last 10 years of me leading a multicultural church where God is just like taking me through detox of grace, love, and truth. No need to throw any more stones, my son. There's some healing that needed to happen, and I'm still on a journey of healing. But I'm a Black man, a Black pastor that's blessed to have amazing people in my church. Some of them are not Black, but yet understand the plight of Black people because I will speak about it. And so I try to be sensitive to all. But I'm in Detroit, Michigan, where we planted a church, me and a team of folks, and our church is in the hood. I live in the hood. Even though I have a congregation that's probably like 55% white, of that 55%, like 85% of them live in the hood with me, moved to the hood and are doing life in the hood. So we celebrate and try to champion. If you're gonna really be about this thing, live it out, not just talk about it. So I've been blessed to know David and Prashan. We got stories. We're gonna hold that for a little bit later in the recording.
My name is Jay Gardner. I'm the youth minister at White Rock Church in Philadelphia. Amen. And I also am helping with a emerging church in Philadelphia as well. I spend a lot of time working with young people. That's my passion. I spent like 7 years as a solo pastor. The people would say, "You do more for the kids than you do for us." It's like, you guys already have everything in place. The kids have nothing. But at any rate, so that's my passion is that. and interfaith work. I mean, authentic interfaith work, not multi-faith, but interfaith. Because a lot of the ills of society I place at the feet of religion. We have so many religions, and we reject the dignity of the humanity of somebody who doesn't believe like us or pray like us or whatever. And so that just spills over because we're religious people. At our heart, what we believe, we act upon what we believe. And so I've really been working on that, particularly with Christian Muslim congregations, trying to see how we can come together and spend time together and ultimately, pray for each other, that we might all attain to God as God has called us. And I think on the other side of that, I see it as God is bigger than just what I can ever know. God is bigger than what, all the great theologians that have come through, they've written a lot of books, and God is even greater than that. And so, and that's on both sides of the fence. So I've been really pushing more, particularly I think that now, during this season, this pandemic and unrest, I think it's a great opportunity for religious congregations, for religious people to come forward and really say that we are together. We are one. God has created all of us. And we are, I love holding on to the idea of.
I just want to salute all the guys here. And Prashant, I really hope you know that this is a divine thing that you're doing. And I say that simply because I see myself in each one of the stories of the gentlemen who shared before me, and in one way or another. I grew up in Inglewood, South Side of Chicago, and predominantly Blackish. Definitely, it's the hood. You know what I mean? And my mom, she was a stickler for education, so she knew that we weren't going to get the education we should get at the neighborhood school a few blocks away. So she bused us away to at the time it was a predominantly white school. And we weren't cognizant of the purpose behind that when we were young. I was, I think, 6. So I went there all 8 years and everything. And I went to this school. At first I was nervous because, preschool and church, I was just only around Black people, only around, my demographic of people. And so, I was nervous, around, different people, especially, I'd only seen white people constantly in the movies, you know what I mean? And so here, now, a lot of my classmates were white, and the school actually began to become very diverse. And so by 8th grade, most of my friends were, across racial lines, white, Hispanic, Asian, Arabic. These were my buddies, and so I wound up, but beyond all of that, the education was like, I think at the time the school was consistently testing in like the top 5 in like the standardized test score. And so I wound up going to an all-Black high school. And so as one of the pastors spoke earlier, I believe it was kind of that balancing of, me being comfortable with, the different demographics, but also re-identifying myself with who I was, as a black guy, as a Black man, African American. And so that I thank God for that balance. And I was able to learn. I had one. It always takes one. I believe, sometimes we feel like there are, peaceable people with peaceable approaches and people with so-called, militant approaches. And I believe every one of them is essential in their own place, in their own time. We had an African American history teacher, which I believe is super important because, most of our perspectives were from the European perspective, world history, U.S. history. And so I took a history course with this guy, and he taught us that, everything we see in these textbooks are told from their perspective. We always have to look at it with a double eye. And that was a huge lesson I got in high school. Then I went to Columbia College here in Chicago to study music. And again, that was literally being like immersed into the world. You know, I mean, everyone is represented there. Every demographic, cross racial lines, um, uh, across preference lines. Everything is represented there. So it's just like you develop this, you know, sense of just accepting everyone for who they are. You know. And so, but through this whole time, I'm developing still in the Black church, and I'm developing as a musician, and I get immersed into the Chicago gospel scene, and worship, you know, was that for me, just the Black worship experience. And there was one point where I was playing two churches. I was playing for the church I grew up in, which is in Bronzeville, and then there was a church here called Salem Baptist Church, which is led by Pastor James Meeks, who was once Illinois senator. And I was playing for his children's church. So I was going back and forth to these, you know, my churches and these churches. I was doing community choirs, and you know, all of us who are African Americans who grew up in the Black church experience know that gospel music is very aggressive. It's very high, you know, high energy. And as a musician, you know, there's this pressure. If you're not playing everything you've ever known or ever learned, you know what I mean? You're not playing, you're not engaged, you know what I mean, to the music. So I got to a point where I was just kind of exhausted with having to play everything every time I sat down, you know, play all the notes. And so I turned on, I believe it was, if it wasn't K-Love, it was just before K-Love. I think it was The Fish, which was a Christian radio station, which was, you know, the predominantly, you know, Christian contemporary, or the white Christian music. And I got absorbed by the fact that, you know, I'm a bass player. The bass player specifically, he may not have been playing up and down the neck, playing every note, but he made two notes really rich and really round, and that just stuck with me. And so I would start listening to that radio station because I felt like I was immersing myself with enough of the gospel music because I was a player. And so that was, I believe, God's precursor for the church that I wound up serving in, and I serve in right now. Is called Willow Creek Community Church in South Barrington. And so by the time I started playing for them, I was really comfortable with the music and with the genre, with the approach. And so they really took to me. I've been playing out there for 12 years now. And through friends there, I met the gentleman who was the worship leader for the Missio Nexus, which is where I met Prashant. But yeah, so like I've had these mixed experiences where like I felt the same way. Like when I was introduced to things in the white church, I was like, man, why aren't we doing things like this? You know, this is so progressive. You know, the approach is so different. But as of now, I'm seeing things on the other side, like the same exact thing. Is like, I feel like we're being held back, or I feel like sometimes, you know, even if it's not intentional, being on the worship team specifically, I feel like sometimes they want to give you the image of a multicultural worship experience, or a multicultural. And so they put us on stage for worship. You know, there's the black guy playing the bass, there's the Asian guy playing the guitar, you know, but I still feel like, and I don't mean to call people out, but it's just what it is. I still feel like in a lot of those circles, the people who are still pushing the buttons are still, you know, of one, just the middle-aged American, you know, white guy, white man, you know. And so it's been kind of an awakening. And I feel like, you know, the race issue is really prevalent in all walks, in law enforcement, and you know, policy and public service. And sadly, you know, as we're all here discussing in the church as well. And I've had a few different awakenings, because, you know, I wound up meeting a young lady there and getting engaged, a Latina woman. Fell in love with her. We got engaged. She's a member of the church. And so I spent a lot, she lives, you know, minutes away from the church. So I spent a lot of time in, you know, the affluent suburb, just, spending time with her and, working, serving with the church. And, I would come back home. I'll be honest, this is kind of silly, but I would come back home because I would miss like the fast food. I would miss my pizza puffs and my French fries with mild sauce, you know what I mean? And that wasn't, like readily available in the predominantly white suburbs. But when I would come back, I would immediately see the difference in the conditions and the conditioning of, the people who live with me, my neighbors, just even from something as simple as just the roads are smooth out there. You don't have to worry about tearing up your car out there. I come back to the South Side and I'm literally like avoiding potholes. Then if I'm avoiding potholes too much, if there's a squad car behind me, I'm getting pulled over. You know what I mean? It's so different, the conditioning here in the city and versus, some of the more affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods. And I feel like all the gentlemen here, I think we've been blessed to experience things on both sides, because I feel like God wants to use us as conduits and to help like bridge those gaps.
Hello, my name is Art Hooker, and I'm a filmmaker and strategist from Dallas, Texas. I lead an organization whose goal is to help people and organizations reimagine what the future could be. Sometimes this reimagination involves filmmaking and a video or some sort of learning content. But then other times, this reimagination leads to other organizations like real estate development companies or music. And so what I'm really excited about with this conversation is being able to come together with our friends globally and locally to be able to reimagine what the future could be with our country and our world. I'm really blessed to also be on the board of Global Unites, and I'm excited about our work together and our work with this conversation. And as we work to see how we can build together or how we can co-create together an equitable future together.
Yes, my name is John Lake, and I am a pastor here in Columbia, South Carolina. I was born, raised, and educated to include college here in South Carolina. So the majority of my life has been spent here in the Bible Belt here in southeastern part of the country. I've lived a lot of my life in relatively diverse spaces, both nonprofit work, for-profit work, and also time spent as a chaplain for the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice. And no matter what space I found myself in, there became over time a real acknowledgement of one or two things: either the denial of the issue of race, where you have lots of people who conveniently, and because they just don't want to go into that place of being uncomfortable and being in a place of difficulty, they just deny the reality of race in terms of being in a racialized society, and how our systems and institutions are deeply not just influenced by, but are deeply entrenched in these things like racism and white supremacy. Also, there's this dynamic of even if people are aware, they don't know what to do. So just by way of short introduction, part of what brings me to this place is that I long for a genuine and whole reconciliation where it is not a false peace, it is not a denial of the past, it is not a denial of what's before us right now, but a substantive conversation that leads to real action, whereby we actually finally start dealing with some stuff. Specifically in my context of the church. So it's just a little bit about me and kind of what brings me to this moment.
But growing up, what were your aspirations and dreams where you were growing up? You know, what was the motivation for you? But at the same time, what were the limitations for your aspirations and dreams as you're thinking with your childhood, in your experience, in your story?
I think when I was younger, I always had a inkling and suspicion that I had a voice that could influence people. Some of it was natural charisma, I think, I'm not a complete extrovert, but there was an energy that I did from time to time I got from being around people. And I always had a vision for wanting to be a part of moving things forward. Not that everything is a problem, but just that we should never be comfortable with the way things are. We should always get better. So I always felt there was some dynamic within me of wanting to lead out front, always wanted to be a part of kind of a shifter, someone who could blow things up in a constructive way. That was always something that was important for me. I grew up in mostly Black spaces in terms of my neighborhood, predominantly Black, low income, went to predominantly Black schools. And so in a sense, when your identity is rooted in that space, unless there's a lot of intentionality, there's a lot of things you don't know about how the world really operates outside of that safe Black space, right? I went to a church that was predominantly white, but again, and it was an amazing experience in a lot of ways. But even in that context, there wasn't a whole lot of conversation that would have prepared me for what the world was really like. Because again, the white people that I worshiped with, they loved me, they were nice to me, but there were never real conversations about race. So there was never a sense of it's going to be different outside of these kind of spaces. So I grew up thinking that I could be, if I'm honest, I can be anything I want to be. I can lead in any capacity. I can be the president of the United States. I can do a lot of different things because I was in spaces that really, really cultivated that kind of hope, that kind of naive assessment that I can do this. And quite frankly, it's really all up to me. I want you to think about that narrative, because that is a powerful narrative in the American context, that it doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter what community you come from. At the end of the day, if you work really, really hard, you can go as far as you want. You know why? Because there are no systems in place that get in the way. There are no structures in place that can really hold you down. And so over time, as I got older, I started realizing I don't think this stuff is as easy as I thought growing up. When you start having experience where you become conscious of race. And I'll give you another example. I've always been relatively articulate. So I'm from a low-income Black community and a Black family, of course, and I'm a little articulate. I like to look a certain way in terms of how I dress. There were moments in which I wasn't comfortable anywhere because a lot of my Black friends constantly reminded me that I'm trying to be white, which I never knew fully what that meant. It's like, trying to be white, this is just who I am. So I had kind of some self-conscious issues about what I even look like. But then as I'm growing up and I'm being around more white spaces in terms of kind of growing up, going to college, going to a conservative evangelical university and those kinds of things, I felt that I belonged there, but then things happen where you realize you don't belong here either. There's a lot of stuff that's going on here where you're realizing, and I guess this is where what I'm trying to kind of capture with my story, is that the world that you grow up thinking you have doesn't tell you that there are a lot of myths in the narratives and stories that you've been believing, and there are not enough voices actually telling you the truth. Because no one wants to hurt your feelings. No one wants to make you feel subconscious about this stuff. But what you actually do is you're not preparing young people for the world that is versus the world that they would like for it to be. Like even today, there are conversations I have where I had a conversation with a white lady yesterday, and we were talking about race, and she said, John, all of us are made in the image of God, and we all bleed the same, and we need to be colorblind, and we're all the same, and all that. And I had to tell her, I said, that's very aspirational, but the facts on the ground don't say that. Those aren't the facts on the ground. That's what we want to believe. That's inspirational and aspirational. That's how it ought to be. But too many people live in the world as it ought to be, but they don't live in the real world that is. And if you don't live in the real world that is, you will never, ever grow into the world as it ought to be. So I'll shut up on this, guys, but there's something about radical truth telling that I can't wait to talk about, because that's one of the biggest things for me when I think of the next generation, even my own generation, that we have to be okay telling uncomfortable truths, because there is no reconciliation where we're talking about healing, repairing, and transforming. None of that can happen if we're not telling the truth about the facts on the ground. We want to live in the world from an aspirational standpoint, which is a convenient way of saying we don't want to deal with what the world really is like, because quite frankly, there are too many of us that actually benefit off the world staying the way that it is, quite frankly, right? So that's kind of my early story, just in terms of thinking that, yes, I can be a great leader. I can go do amazing things in the world. Not that I couldn't. I mean, there's some truth to that, but there's some truth that was conveniently left out that I didn't understand the world the way that it actually is. There is this thing called white supremacy. There is this thing called racism. There is this thing called prejudice. That all these isms out here that are influencing us and are shaping people and shaping narratives that people aren't even aware of until much later you start asking the question, why do I think like this? Why am I always in a contradiction between what people tell me, but what my actual experiences are in the world, right? These are real things. But anyway, that's just a little bit of my early story, just in terms of my aspirations, what I would have liked to do. But the fact that I don't think the spaces that I grew up in, as powerful as they were in terms of consciousness, still didn't tell me exactly what this world was really like that I was growing up in.
It's interesting, right? So I had a very similar situation as to John. I was raised in a poor Black neighborhood, basically. And I was always, the way I talk now is the way I always talk. So when people were like, hey, why do you talk white? I'm like, first of all, what is white? Because I haven't seen it. The only white person I know is Catholic. Literally, I was like, I don't know what white is. Like, I've never seen a white person. Not really, no. Maybe some albino people. And this is as a kid. And then, but then around 4th grade, my parents thought that it was a good idea to move me out of Black neighborhoods into a poor white neighborhood. And so a poor white neighborhood that fed into a wealthy school. So then I got to be in that situation. So when I was a kid, like, it was really difficult to find, because similar to what John was saying, you like with your family, you talk white. With white people, they're scared, or they treat you like you're a missionary, or like you just come from another country, and they're like, so can I touch your hair and all this? But so my initial that's when I had hair, of course. Nobody has to touch my hair anymore. Well, I never thought about that. All this stuff. You be thankful for something. I mean, I ain't heard that in a long time. Oh man, I didn't think about that. But so the thing that's interesting though is, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer, and I was really fascinated with math, science, and all of that. So I always had the interest in math and science, but also had interest in media for action, how to take action and how to create media that inspired people. But I was definitely going to be an aeronautical engineer until the day I stayed home and I watched, I actually pretended to be sick from home, not sick from school, because I was like, okay, I don't feel like trying to explain to everybody, like my hair's been pulled, I'm tired. So I'm gonna stay home and watch the Challenger, So I stayed home to watch the Challenger shuttle, because that was something I just really loved. And I was at home alone, and I just remember watching the Challenger and watching that explosion. And I remember there was a teacher there. I think there was an African-American astronaut, McNair. And I just remember thinking, I felt so connected to that experience, but I thought, I would hate for the work that I do. There was mistakes made, right? And so and I was trying to deal with that. That was a formative time in my life. But seeing that explosion and seeing the deaths of those people, I didn't want my science to contribute to someone's death that way. And then I kind of a whole little grieving process. This is pre-cell phone, so I was home alone. And so, I mean, my parents were very Pentecostal, not really kind of engaged in in science. So when they came home and I was crying, they're like, "You don't even know these people. Why are you crying?" They're like, "What's going on?" And so then I started leaning more toward the ability to communicate, right? Because the way I dealt with people that had a problem with the way I talked or racism, I use humor, if you could tell. And so I learned, because I had this guy named Stanley. Stanley was like, every time I would say Stanley, this is right before we moved to the white neighborhood. Stanley was like, why you talk like that, right? Stanley always had snot running out of his nose. It was always like, I always remember those kids that didn't wipe their noses. They were always had little crusty. whenever Stanley would ask me, but like, why you talk like that, I would always act like I couldn't understand what he was saying. I was like, what do you mean I can't understand you, Stanley? It was just so different little mechanisms I would use to keep things sort of normal. But I'll never forget, I started to really see communication. I use humor to actually get information. So I remember when I was in the 5th grade that I didn't realize, and this actually builds into the situations I'm in now where I'm constantly explaining basic things to people. Like the idea, like that a lot of people say that systemic racism doesn't exist. They're like, what do you mean systemic racism? They're saying if you break the law, you go to jail. That's not racist, right? And so I hear, but it's like so many complex sort of conversations that the average person doesn't get. But I first got an inkling into that is when I was the only Black kid in my class, and I was wanting to connect. So I told everybody in the class that I was African. And they're like, really? And this went on for a full year where every day they would say, Arthur, tell us something African. And so I would literally sit in the middle of the room and just make up words. And they would say, tell me, Arthur, tell me what this means in African. And I would just make up words, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, it was funny, but it was kind of like, I kept thinking like, are they really gonna continue to believe me? And I gave each of them an African name. Nobody ever asked me what part of Africa I was from. Nobody ever asked me what country I was from. There was no way to really fact check. And I just remember thinking through that process, like, I have to know white culture to like a really, really high degree, you know, and I have to understand the nuances of a lot of different things to a really high degree, but they would believe anything I told them right now, you know? And this even ties into, I have another friend that I've been friends with since the 5th grade that I keep talking to him, even though I know that some of the things he says is really racist. Like he every time something happens, he sends, who's Candace, what's her name? Candace
Owens, I think.
Yes. So he's one of the friends that'll say, hey, Candace Owens says this. I keep saying, no, don't send me that again. I'm trying.
Candace ain't Black.
Yeah, but I'm like, at least send me Ben Carson. Send me Ben Carson quotes. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can defend that. You know, I can, if you give me Ben Carson, I could, when you send Candace Owens, right?
I don't know.
But the reason it's really important is because, like, I've known him since the 5th grade, right? And so, and he's seen the injustice I've experienced, but he still doesn't get it. And so I've had so the only way he actually got it was, like, we had an experience recently where I'm a filmmaker, so I went out to do this thing, which is crazy. I'm gonna make this fast because I'm talking too long, but this is I think it's a really interesting thing when you talk about like the level of what we have to do to be able to navigate a situation. So I went out with him and his friends. They were this thing called hog hunting in Texas. So it is out in the woods, and we went to go hog hunting, right? And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is crazy. It's probably not wise. It's like everybody looks like people from Duck Dynasty. So we get out into the woods, right? And this is but I was explaining this to my friend that I had to give him the story so he could understand just how much I have to be able to navigate every situation. So we go out into the woods, everybody, very country people, you know, they, everybody's spitting, chewing tobacco, they got rifles. And so when you're hog hunting, a dog, you basically have a dog and the dog goes and stops the hog, and then somebody, then sometimes people use knives or they use guns. And so one of the guy's dogs, one of his good friends, he has this dog, and his friend, and this is right before we started, and it's this black dog. And the dog came up, and dogs know their name, right? Usually. And he kept calling the dog Blackie. And the dog, listen, he said, come here, Blackie. Come here, Blackie. And every time he called the dog Blackie, I was noticing this dog is not responding. Every dog I know, dogs know their names. I mean, am I right? And so I'm interpreting this country man spitting tobacco, yelling at his dog, Blackie, come here. And Blackie would not answer, right? And so I was telling my friend, and he knows, these are his friends, so he knows Blackie's real name. And so I told my friend, I said, in that moment, I had to decide if I was safe or not being with you, knowing that your friend's dog's name is the N-word.
Mm.
And I'm in the woods with all these armed men.
Mm.
And I'm like, because this person's telling me the racism is not complicated. I said it's very complicated, because I have to distinguish between, will you try to kill me? Knowing those types of facts, you know? And so those are the kind of things that have formed me, and that ability to be able, so I thought I was getting away from having to make decisions that could kill people, that my mistakes could cause death when I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. But I didn't realize, moving into being a communicator and being a producer, a person that creates messaging, that same risk is there. But I've spent my whole life being able to get fine-tuned to be able to understand the nuances.
For me, I was really into comic books. And now that I think about it, it's actually kind of crazy. I was, everyone on my dad's side did things with their hands. They were the musicians and the illustrators, the people who drew. And so I inherited that. And I really got into comic books around 8 or 9 years old. And so I kept drawing, and I always wanted to draw comic books. I'm like, man, one day, hopefully I can draw these comic books. But, back then everything wasn't as accessible as it is now. So I didn't know anyone from any of the, publishing companies, or, how to get in contact with anyone for that. So I was thinking, well, maybe architecture, because I like skyscrapers as well. I was, fascinated with like the Sears Tower. I'm like, well, maybe I'll do architecture, as like my thing, to, make a paycheck, to make a living. But my heart was always with, comic book illustration. I'd actually created my own superheroes and everything. And so I just think about sometimes, if I'd actually had access to that then, I'm talking like mid 90s, late 90s, what tax bracket I would be in right now when you look at 80% of what's at the box office right now. You know what I mean?
Come on. Yeah.
But anyway, didn't have that access. But so I decided to do architecture because I was into, skyscrapers. I thought maybe I'd just be in drawing houses and skyscrapers all day. And I was lucky enough to get 2 internships, the summer out of my junior year and the summer out of my senior year, in 2 architecture firms. And I got to see it firsthand. And it was then I realized I didn't like being cooped in an office, in a cubicle space, in a box for 8 hours at a time. I like to move around, And so, an architect who had been in the game for a while, maybe in his mid-50s, walked up to me. So you want to be an architect, huh? I said, well, I was thinking about it. He's like, well, you'll never be rich. Engineers where all the money is. And so then at that moment, it's just like, okay, maybe this is not for me, So coincidentally, in that same period of time, I started writing music. I was listening to a lot of music, and I was somewhat into poetry. So like my musical influences and my literary influences kind of, converged, and I started writing music. And again, this is the late 90s. I didn't have, I didn't have a cell phone, but like, now, you have production centers on your iPhone. You can literally make a record on your iPhone. We didn't have that back then. I didn't know any musicians, so I took it upon myself to try to learn everything myself. And I got to bass, and it just got addictive. And I saw a guy on my 17th birthday playing bass at this midnight musical, and they had his bass written. About the midnight musicals, man. I heard you say Pentecostal. I'll never forget it, man. This guy was wailing, man, on his bass, and they had him real loud in the system, like you could feel it in your chest. And I was, in that moment, I was convicted. It was like, God, that's what I have to do that right there. And God blessed my cousin, who's also a recording artist. he knew the guy because he used to play for his group, and he introduced me to him, and he gave me one bass lesson before he moved to Los Angeles. Him and his one of his best friends, who's also a bass player, they both moved to Los Angeles. And the next time I saw them, they were, you know, trading like Boys to Men and Hootie and the Blowfish, and now they're trading like Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears. They did really well for themselves. But like that moment was like, it really shifted. My 17th birthday, it really shifted everything I wanted to do. So I will say that it scared the hell out of my mom though, because all I did up to that point was draw. So when I told her I wanted to go to school for music, she was like, whoa, you know, even though she's a singer, she was the minister of music in the church I grew up in. But, you know, at that time, people weren't, you know, we weren't conditioned to follow our dreams. We were conditioned to get a job and keep the lights on, you know what I mean? And so I just, you know, I stuck with it, you know, and again, I feel very fortunate because I feel like for the most part, at least in my later childhood, what I wanted to do musically it's manifested, you know. God has been really, really good. And I think a lot of it came from the purpose he had in my life. I learned the instrument pretty much at a late age, you know, by the time I was pretty much 18, by the time I really started playing. And at that point, most of my, you know, contemporary peers were like already, you know, recording records and, you know, traveling at 18, 19 years old. But I started really late, but Chicago is a great place for musicians because we seem to like breed bass players, drummers. It's crazy here. So God put me on like this fast forward because I feel like he had a purpose in my life through music and music ministry. And he would use that as a tool for me to connect to people. So I look back, and the funny thing is my mom, she always, even to this day, she says she kind of regretted not being able to put us into like Suzuki schools at young ages and get us music lessons as a kid because she couldn't afford it. But I said, Mom, I'm literally traveling the world now, like using my gift. So the desire you had in your heart, God saw it through anyway. You know what I mean? So it's just, you know, I thank God for that. That I will say that that dream and that aspiration has manifested. I picked up a pencil the other day and tried to draw. I hadn't drawn in like, I don't know, probably like 20 years. It was a different experience. And I still feel like, you know, that is still something that, you know, could, a gift that, you know, can still be used. But the music thing definitely, it's positioned me and literally transformed the way I, you know, just my life, you know, the way I engage people. You know, as a musician, you know, I could come on a set and I could be, you know, my mid 30s. My coworker could be somebody who's 20 years old. You know what I mean? And then, you know, my other coworker to my right could be someone who's, you know, 55. You know, it's just one of those platforms that really bridges those gaps, you know, if you're open to it and if you're fortunate enough to have a, you know, kind of an open network. And that's also one of the things that put me into like multicultural, multiracial atmospheres, just being able to, you know, respect everyone's genre, everyone's background, what they're doing musically, and, you know, commit to what I'm doing with this particular group of musicians, you know what I mean? And not feel like, you know, what I'm doing is just it, or where I came from, my foundations of what I learned in music is just the thing, being open to learn. And it also manifested into me just being able to engage people just on a verbal level. You know, just again, after being able to play music and experience music with people from different backgrounds, it translated when I would come back home to my like Southside neighborhood. And as you know, a lot of our, you know, convenience stores, a lot of our, you know, gas stations are owned by people from, you know, like Middle Eastern countries and from India or from, you know, Arabia or, you know, and everywhere adjacent. And so for me, you know, we grew up, we all put them in the same box. They were all the same. But as I began to make more friends, I saw distinct differences, you know what I mean? And just like, you know, Whereas at one point in my life, everyone would, myself included, would put all Latinas in the same box. But then you grow up, you learn there's Puerto Rican, there's Mexican, there's Nicaraguan. You know what I mean? And so I saw a guy who I would see, you know, very regularly in the gas station, and I was prompted to ask him about his background. And I could see it, like, it just totally changed his, you know, disposition towards me, because I know people don't ask him that, you know what I mean? Whether they're white, black, whatever. And I think he was really taken by the fact that I sincerely wanted to know about him and where he came from, the distinction about, like, you know, are you from India, or how is India different from this area? And he was given the opportunity to explain that. And I thank God for that opportunity, because now that he turned into a friend, he's come to some of my shows, you know, just watch me perform. And even other gas stations, guys, you know, they recognize me. I didn't think they paid any attention. I went to a gas station I wasn't in for a long time, and the guy said, "Man, where have you been?" I'm like, "Oh, I've been in the burbs a lot." He was like, "Yeah, man, you haven't been in here for a while." I'm like, "I didn't think you paid any attention." He was like, "Well, man, you remember good people." You know what I mean? And again, I thank God for my musical experience, because that's what positioned me to be open to people from different backgrounds and engage people from different backgrounds, and sincerely ask about people, you know, about people's stories. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I believe those are the seeds that are sown to break that divisiveness. You know what I mean? And bridge those gaps.
When I was young, my aspirations were probably like 4 categories. I wanted to be president, wanted to be a rapper, wanted to be a hooper. There's one other one. Wanted to be a break dancer. Yeah, those were the things that I was excited about. And you know, I had these interesting categories, and I didn't realize it until I grew a little bit later, that those categories all came out of men that had entourages. Like, whenever I saw them, they had a big crew. And I dreamed about those things, but I really didn't think it was something that I could ever do, to be honest, because I never saw anyone of power. I just saw people with crews. And so even in my neighborhood, like the only people of power in my neighborhood, the only folks I ever met that were white were people of power. It was cops, teachers, and salesmen. And come knocking door to door trying to sell us insurance or whatever. And so in the 6th grade, my mom transferred me to another school. And in that school, the principal was a black man. And it rocked me. Like, what? We could have authority? And actually I started thinking, maybe I can be the president. Like my flows ain't that tight, but maybe I can rap a little. Okay, hold up. It just started, like, I started really to dream then. But that component of doing it in community with people is just the way I'm wired. It's just the way God has made me. And so whether it has been nonprofits, or whether it has been a church environment, or whether it has been groups on college campuses, the Lord has allowed me to use my influence to move people, not just try to go it alone. And so that's what I'm continuing to try to walk in. I'm honored to serve, but for some reason he's placed a fire in me that has me as a servant leader as well. And now I'm kind of fulfilling that dream that 6-year-old saw of, man, we can be in places of authority, but it's not just for us. It's to move something greater.
So growing up, I was a weird kid. Some people might say I'm still weird, but I was 7 or 8 when they asked me what I wanted to be, and I said a pastor. And so that was always my answer. And people were like, sure, you don't want to be like anything else, like a doctor, policeman? I was like, no, I want to be a pastor. I didn't see what God was doing then, but that helped keep me out of a lot of things. Like like I want to get into trouble, and people, well, no, he can't because he wants to be a pastor, and I'd be like, no, okay. It helped me a lot, and I loved people. My saying now is like, I love people. People suck, but I love people, and that helped me get to see a lot of insight to what people believed because they felt safe around me. Whether it was white, black, Hispanic, people felt like they could just tell me how they really felt because at the end of the day, David's going to love me. It wasn't until about, I was like 10 or 11, I saw a black state trooper. And similar to Pastor Stevenson, I never thought that could happen. And I was like, a black trooper in Massachusetts? I was like, wow, he must have been in the military, done everything, got connected. And it was a thought, but I still didn't think it could happen. The more I kept talking about it with people and my connection with folks and seeing how divided the country was, I wanted to kind of have a platform to be able to voice what I believed. And right now, I think I'm in this season where I've been so grateful to get all the information because you can't be aggressive. And I know you were speaking about Pastor lacking this radical truth. I felt like at times where I would say that, then people wouldn't tell me how they really felt. They would just kind of shut down when I would approach them with that. But I think now's the time for that. But I think in this approach that I was having with people, giving them grace, making them feel loved, I've gotten so much insight. And now I'm kind of like, okay, so now what do I do? I know what's happening out there. I had one guy tell me, I also worked in the prisons. I should tell you guys that too before I became a trooper. And I worked around a lot of white men that honestly didn't feel like there was anything wrong with the system. Like somebody said earlier, people do bad things, they go to jail. And I'm like, so I explained this. Like, this guy is in for rape, but he's only doing a year. This guy is in for selling marijuana. He's doing 10 years. And they're like, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. Yeah. And I'm like, the system's not broken. And it's like, you throw facts at them. They're just like, yeah. It's like, yeah, you're right. But anyway, this guy ended up telling me, it's not that he hates Black people. It's just he doesn't like seeing Black and white people together as a couple. He's like, Dave, I'm only telling you that, you just have a love for people. And, I know you're not going to judge me. And I was like, all right, well, Richie, I'm not trying to judge you, but I'm really having a hard time understanding how you don't see it as being racist. And I'll never forget, his phrase to me was, I consider myself to be a white separatist. And I was like, I don't know what that means, bro. And he's like, well, I just like to see my people together. And I feel like my race is dying. And so I don't want them to be lost because we're all like becoming this big melting pot. And I was like, Richie, that's racist. And he's like, oh, David, the fact that you would say that to me really hurts me. And he was like genuinely shocked that a view like that would be considered racist. And it was happening a lot in the midst of like all these white people, like, oh, Dave, he gets it. He's level-headed. And they would share these things with me. And they'd be like, yeah, no, that's not okay. And they're like, what? Like, what? Like, you know me. Like, I don't have a racist, bone in me. And I'm like, God, so what do I do? Like, I don't want to go back to the Black community and say, oh, you know what? I get where he's coming from. Like, he really is just ignorant. Like, he does not get it. And we have to give him grace. And then I'm going to the white community saying, I get it. Like, that guy was actually doing something bad, but he cannot represent all the Black people. Because a lot of that was happening too. Like, they'd find the one Black guy that was everything they were talking about, and he would be the billboard for all Black people. And I was like, you can't do that. In the same way, I wouldn't let my Black people look at one white guy and say, that's how they all are. I was like, we need to give each other's grace. So that kind of like pushed me into, wanting to bring it to the church. So when I was pastoring at these like white churches, I was trying to bring it in, and I got a lot of great insight. But at the end of the day, I was like, okay, so now what? So I'm telling them these truths. You know, it's going on social media. But I have a family, like, you know, I want to do something that's going to be ingrained in my son and daughter, that is not just for the moment, but it's setting like a strong foundation. Because I live, like, we talk about this bridge gap, and this is where I get overwhelmed, because we're all playing different parts. And I'm like, I want to make sure I'm playing the right part. Because right now I'm in Groveland, which is like a suburbs of, you know, Boston. But I feel like I'm talking to people and saying things to them that they were not here, because they're not going into the city. But I feel like, well, should I be in the city though? Like just now, like yesterday, sorry, there's a lot, guys. So yesterday I have a city cop pull up into my driveway, a white guy, because he knows I'm a black trooper. And he's like, hey, I'm sorry, you mind if I just ask you a question? He's like, I know you've been here, like, you know, it seemed like I could talk to him. Like, yeah, what's on your chest? He's like, what do you think about everything that's going on right now? It's like, I think it's wrong what happened with the cop and what he did. He goes, yeah, he goes, now he's like, I'm a white cop. I'm a detective here in this little small town. He goes, I hate everybody equally. He goes, but now I'm going to be looked at as a racist cop because I'm white. And he goes, unless I see a person that gives me a reason to show me that they're a good person, he goes, I treat everybody the same across the board. He goes, so now my job is going to be put at risk if I need to do it, if it's a black guy, because they're going to think I'm racist. He goes, my livelihood, my kids, my family. So I got this white man, sharing with me his frustrations with what's happening because of the systemic race injustice that's been going on for a while. He's telling me this, and I'm like, yeah, I get. And I'm like, what is going on right now? He's like, and people, he goes, my family, I got a brother-in-law that, he's mixed and he thinks I'm racist, but I'm not. And I'm like, I don't like, is this now where I give him the radical truth and I get into an argument with them? And I was like, to what avail? Like what? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to give him grace right now and try to, be quick to listen and slow to speak. But at some point, things need to be spoken. And I think that's where I'm at right now. That's why I appreciate this panel. And I don't want what to be spoken to just be out of just emotion. I don't want it to be just to hurt someone else, because in essence, I'm doing exactly what they've been doing. I want it to be impactful. So I never thought like being a pastor and a policeman could work until I thought of like that phrase that was on the side of the car, which says to protect and serve, how they had it back. I was like, you know what? This whole time, that's what it's been saying, to protect and serve. But all I've known is that militant white man coming to my neighborhood. And I was like, there's no way. There's no way they're serving. And even now, as a trooper, I went through break-in. And, a lot of people say, oh, you should have said that was racism, what they did to you. It's for another day. All the stories of the things that have been happening to me. I got my break-in extended, and what I was told was, you're too nice. And I was like, well, I don't like. What did I do? I'm writing tickets. I'm arresting people. What is them being too nice? What they're trying to say is, we want you to treat everybody like a jerk, because that's what we do. We come up there, we're militant. We're like, what are you doing? What? I can't tell how many times I've stopped a situation. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that would have ended up in gunfire. Like, I don't know. Like, we're going up to a car. They're like, what are you doing? I was like, hey, where you guys coming from? I smell food in the car. Y'all eating chicken? What's going on? They're like, laughing. Everything gets de-escalated. They're like, oh, man, I'll tell you, man. We're going over here, man. This guy got me, man. And they're like, all right, that's all right. I'm just grab me your license. We'll check in. We'll send you on your way. And the other guy standing there like this with his hand on his gun, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you treating them like people? And I get back, I'm like, what are you doing, guy? Like, until they give us a reason, you bring it, like, you're supposed to be the professional. And they're like, yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Like, yeah. But then I get told, no, you're just too nice. We're going to extend you. And I see that, and I'm like, it's hard. It's like, somehow it's ingrained in them. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how it's happened, but they believe it. And I'm trying to play my part now, but now I'm trying to find the words because I know it needs to be radical truth and try to figure out, does that mean I just, like you said earlier, I just try to find out how to swim. What does swimming look like?
So growing up, my dad was a pastor, so I went around with him and did prayers and all that other stuff. That was interesting, but I had no interest in doing anything like that. I wanted to be a fireman. There was a firehouse a few blocks away. We'd go there. School trips, we'd go there. I loved the pole, and so I wanted to do that. And then in 4th grade, I was placed into this program where we were bused out to another school district, and I was like the only Black kid in all my classes. And so basically, that was it. From that point on until now, that I've always been like the only Black kid or one of 3, in class. And so I was doing that. And so, I never got harassed. I didn't get harassed by too many people about talking white. And I spoke properly because my mother wouldn't allow it any other way. So that's what you get. However, I'd noticed difference in that arena, but it wasn't really that difficult to navigate that space. I'd go home to the Black neighborhood, Black church, and that was my space. And I would go off to school. I had a couple of Asian friends who were at that school. I had a couple of Asian friends at that school. And so things were pretty nice. We moved out to the suburb, the rural area. And that's what got interesting. I remember we was in middle school and kids started touching my hair. And then that's when I was first called a nigger. And that happened a few times. I got in fights all the time because kids would say stupid stuff and then I'd punch them. And then also what was interesting was I was a reader. I loved reading. And I was excelling, and I was in special programs, for kids who like to read, whatever. But then when I get out to this other school, I was placed in, I wanted to go to college, but it was like, no, you don't want to do that. We're going to put you in this woodshop class. And so the track that I was on was for vocational studies, that sort of thing. For me to do college prep, that had to be an elective. So I had to get approval to take a college prep course. And so I would do that in addition to my other work. And I told my advisor, my guidance counselor, I wanted to go to college. And her response was, no, you don't want to do that. College is too hard. You're doing really well in this track. And you should go to plumbing school or something like that. And so so I turned in the information anyway. She sat on it. So needless to say, that was kind of a difficult piece there. Another thing in high school that was interesting, and this really annoyed my parents, kids would put KKK materials in my locker. And so I would, open my locker and I'd see, pamphlets and this, that, and the other. And so I would go home, I'd take it home and I'd show it to my parents and I'd say, I'm going to write them and join. And they said, they would get really, they were really upset about that. But that's the kind of kid I was. I would speak up. I would talk back. And I didn't think it was disrespectful, but I would speak my mind. And so, and through this, I really wanted to do science. I thought I wanted to be a physician. But then when I get to college, I'm doing research and I'm really enjoying that much more. And so I'm sticking with that. So at this point, religion was, in my mirror. Because, I get there, it's like, religion, that's the white man's tool of oppression. So that's where, that was that point. We had the white Jesus in our house growing up, and I talked to my parents, like, take that down because Jesus isn't white. And, I encountered people who'd say, we're all made in God's image. And then I would ask, so what does that image look like? And it's like, oh, white dude sitting on a, it's like, okay, so there we go. So clearly I'm not made in God's image. So I took on a dare, at a bet with a good friend of mine, I took a sociology course, it was sociology of religion, and learned a lot about different religions and learned about how religions work and the connection between religion and nationalism. And that really got me stirred up as far as engaging in religion again. And the thing that was interesting, and I've been involved. I'm Christian, and I've been, I've involved myself with the evangelical groups, with the white evangelical groups, with the Pentecostal groups, with the Azusa groups, with the Catholic groups, just the gambit. My dad was Baptist, and I'm Baptist, and so. But the thing I discovered was that it was when I had an experience in New Hampshire. I was working there for like a month, and I was looking for a church. So I go into Yellow Pages, I find this church, I go visit this church, all white church, black guy walks in the church. I get the, like they do in the movies, everybody stops and looks. So I got that, but no one spoke to me. No one spoke to me. No one shook my hand. No one acknowledged me during that whole worship and even to the time leaving. And that was something that was really bothersome. And I mean, that really stood out. And it reminded me of these other circles that I moved in, where I learned that I was the exception. You're not like the others. You're not like, you're the good one. You're articulate. You read really well. You're really smart. That kind of stuff. And so people saw me as exceptional. And so, I had very much difficulty with that, because I know a bunch of black folk who were like, we're all smart. Okay, if given opportunity, we all rise to the occasion. And so I had real difficulty with that. And then again, so, I wanted to engage. I wanted to take whatever opportunities and experiences that I had and share that with the community. And I find myself back in church circles. So I go to seminary. I go to Southern Baptist Seminary, and I'm pretty excited about it. And then it was there where I learned about the Slave Bible. They had a copy there one time. I had a chance to look at that, and I thought that was interesting. I was bothered by that, but that's history. And then I was taking a Christian history course, and I wanted to do we had to pick a research topic, and so my topic was going to be the Coptic Church. And my Christian history professor said, well, I don't know anything about that, and that's really not that significant in Christian history. And so I got a little angry there. And then in seminary, they have the Augustine's Confessions. And on one of the books that's published, they've got this white dude sitting under a tree. And I remember asking the question, it's like, why is Augustine white and he's African? And he couldn't answer that. And I said, well, what about Anselm? And what about the Desert Fathers? And what about da-da-da? And so needless to say, they said, Jay, are you comfortable here? And so they didn't really appreciate that or my Malcolm X poster on my wall. So I left that seminary and go back, and I still want to engage young people to give them experiences and exposures that I had, believing that that's really the thing that moves. And so I always wanted to help people. What can I do to help people? How can I do that? And I find that when I engage in the community, I do science programs for kids. I've been doing that for a long time. I see that as a way to help people. And then I got engaged in doing pastoral work, ministry work, pastoral work. And I began to see opportunities where I can help people change, move forward, I'll put it that way. And so that's where I am. And the challenge is for me, being able to navigate these spaces, being able to, I've learned the double languages. I've learned the two worlds. I've learned the two spaces. So I've learned how to navigate those spaces well. And so, but it's interesting, I'd rather not. And so as I become older, I don't do the double speak, or I work at not doing the double speak. And I speak up when I see, when I'm in the white circles and I'm at the meetings and that sort of thing, and somebody says something they shouldn't, I'm pretty good at speaking up about that, like then and there, because I think it's necessary for people. It's like, when you're training something, when you're teaching, when you're potty training kids, you got to catch them in the act. You don't come back, 5 hours later and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You gotta get them right there. And so that's been part of my way that I've been operating. And again, like I said, my interest is in interfaith work because for the past 1,600 years, we have pointed at somebody else and said, you're going to hell. And as long as you can think, as long as anybody can condemn anyone to going to hell, you've dehumanized that person. And you've gone against what God has established from the beginning. And the moment you dehumanize anyone, we're going against God. And there's so much of that in the United States, in Western Christianity, is dehumanizing slaves because they're not human, dehumanizing Native Americans because they're not, they're not white, dehumanizing, Muslims, okay, because they worship some other kind of God. And they're all going to hell, and so we can dehumanize them, and therefore we can kill them. And that's part of the struggle. We can have, the struggles that that David's having. When he with people say, well, it's okay, I'm not racist, I can do this and that and the other. It's because, it's easy for me, it's easy for me because it doesn't affect me. And that person's not a person. That being is not a person who I need to respect. And so in so many places, we dehumanize the other and we treat them like crap. And we do that because we can, and we don't see anything wrong with it. And we're justified in it. God smiles upon it and so forth. And so that's really been a challenge for me, is to really to meet people and to really press the point that we are all made in God's image. And that image is not some old white dude. We're made in God's image, and which means that in looking at each of us, we see the image of God, not just that one particular painting from Michelangelo. And so that's a really important piece for me. And so I guess what did I aspire to when I wanted to grow up? What was I inspired by? I wanted to help people. I really didn't know what that meant. Like I said, I was in a couple of special programs. We had this physician who carried us around and introduced us to a lot of things. I saw my dad as he was a pastor and he's going around helping people. I didn't want to do the church thing because I was pissed off at the church across the board because I thought they didn't treat my dad well. And I saw too much hypocrisy in it and so forth. But overall, I saw that people, all of us need help. And God has placed all of us in here with these gifts and given us opportunities and places in certain places so that we can help, someone. And so I think that's where I am now. I've come to accept that piece, that it's not just, doing science. It's not just being a pastor. It's not just working with kids. It's not just doing community work. All of these things are essential to helping the community. And one individual's not helped unless the community's helped. Jesus died for all. Not just 1, 2, 3, or 4, but all. And so I really take that to heart.
We've got all these stories. Most of you have not met each other till now. We have from Illinois, from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Texas, Michigan, and South Carolina. But when you're talking about your aspirations and your stories growing up, immediately along with that story, your racial identity, the challenges of being from that community and what the challenge, it all was part of your story. It was inbuilt into that. And this is not scripted, we're not trying to tell you, this is what you're going to say, this is what you're going to say. This is from the heart. And you could see the resonance across the screen, not across the room, but across the screen of people, that's my story. I know that, I feel that, that's going on. But those are the realities that most from the majority community cannot relate to. Mm-hmm. So now another element of this, we already mentioned elements of racism that you've experienced, but I'd like for you to share on how have moments of racism really manifested in your life, how your experience is very different to that of a majority person. But at the same time, given what happened, what's happening this week and what's been happening for decades on, how have you been processing that? how you experience in your own life, and then you see a manifestation of it on a broader nation day in and day out. And then you're also struggling with the fact of a lack of acknowledgement or even believing that there's something wrong. How are you processing it? How are you dealing with that? And how would you also advise younger people who are processing that right now of things that you have incorporated into your life? And how can they be doing that in this situation?
I guess a little bit with humor. I'm convicted with what Pastor Gardner, Pastor Jay was just sharing, and about the whole analogy with the potty training. I tend to take the approach of like, all right, that was a lot, and I know it was said because they are comfortable right now. I'm the minority, right, in every sense of that word. And so I'll wait, or I'll pull them aside and I'll confront them. A couple of days ago, and I should have called them out right there. I'm sitting down and my sergeant's next to me. We're watching the protest happen. I'm on the desk, and this guy, he's just a preacher, right? Like we all preach. He's speaking with passion, and he's talking. And he's like, the time for change is now. Then I was like, hey, yes. And he goes, so why is he foaming at the mouth? And I remember thinking like, I'm going to yell at this guy. But everything's going through my head. He's my sergeant. Like, I just got transferred to this barracks. Like what? I don't know this guy. Like, I don't have that relationship. And so I turned. I still talk to him, but not as aggressively as I want to. I was like, sir, he's not foaming at the mouth. He's preaching with passion. And he just kind of looked at me, and he's like, "Whoa, no, like, why can't they?" And he says, "Why can't he be more like Martin Luther King?" I was like, "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean by that." And there was another guy there who knew me in context, another white guy who knew I was a preacher, know that I love people, and he's just turning red, looking at me because I could see he doesn't know what I'm gonna do, how I'm gonna respond. And I was like, "Sir, Martin Luther King did speak like that. That's what you're saying. That's what you're calling the foaming of the mouth. Martin Luther King spoke with passion." And he goes, "No, Martin Luther King, he never yelled like that. He never talked like that." And I was like, well, and as I'm trying to process, he just gets up and storms off. And I look at the guy that's there turning red. I'm like, and he goes, "David, you don't need to say anything. I've heard Martin Luther King's speech. I know that wasn't right." And I'm just like, okay. I'm not sure what he's thinking or what has been happening. And that white guy, because we had that conversation, I mean, he was telling everybody in the barracks. I was getting people like, "Hey, did the sergeant really say that to you?" And I'm like, they're like, "I can't believe that." No, they're upset now. And I thought for that moment, like, I don't know, maybe that he told other people because I approached him about it. But my response is, I want people to know, even though I'm angry, not just to be like, oh, of course, an angry black guy. I'm to know I'm hurt as well because I love you. Like, I'm not just like, "Oh, you stupid white guy, you didn't get it." But like, I want you to know that I view you as a human being. And that's why that's so hurtful towards me. Like, you're not just a white guy in the uniform. You are a human being. And it hurts me to see that you don't see that guy as a human being. So I've been trying to take that approach. I think it's great that people know, like, when I speak about it, that they're loved by me, but it's difficult because I think some people have made the decision no matter what, they're going to hold to those views. And that's where I get stuck. So I'm like, so what do I do with that guy? Now, do I become aggressive towards that guy? Like when people can say, "Well, yeah, no, I know. Yeah, I think the president's an idiot, but he's doing good for the world." And I'm like, what? Like, all right, is that where I become aggressive with my truth, or that I don't know. Growing up, I think I was like in the city. I didn't realize what was happening. I think it was going to college I realized what was going on. I mean, I was put in a lot of, they're called academic prep, special needs classes and things like that. And I had no idea. I just knew I was going to school until I'd say it was maybe like high school, where my middle school teacher, he pulled me aside, a white male, and he was like, "David, like, why are you in these classes?" And I was like, "Mr. Penta, I don't know what you mean. Like, this is where they told me to go." He goes, He goes, these kids are not gonna end up in good places. And I was like, what? I mean, we were jokesters and stuff like that, but, and he goes, you're smarter than that. But it wasn't like I had a choice. Like I was told, hey, yeah, we're gonna put you in this class. And I look back, I'm like, that whole educational system was a setup. But I didn't know I was in it. It wasn't until my eyes were open now that I see it. Like they actually closed down my elementary school in Hyde Park in Boston. It was the worst elementary school ever. My middle school is no longer. Like, I'm like I had no idea. But looking back, I'm like, that's terrible, which is why in Boston has a whole busing situation that had to happen because people wanted the black kids to go to a certain school and the white kids to go to this school. And they're like, no, that's not okay. Everybody needs, it's a public education. And that was a big thing. So I think it's just now as an adult, I'm realizing my defense mechanism was, you know what, I'm not going to get angry because I don't like feeling out of control. I'm just going to love on people and show people that I'm hurt. And I've used that as my response now as an adult, but I also know now there's more I need to do. Like I'll show you I'm hurt, but something needs to change.
I just want to say a couple things and then I'll give a couple stories. It pains me even to hear David say what he said, but even when we think about all the things that we've been communicating even over the last hour, think about how we have been conditioned to be more concerned about how white people see our responses than we are to be honest about our pain. You know what I mean? Think about that. We have to police our response to racism and make sure we are exceptional black men so that we don't upset white people who should be upset at racism, right? And I say that because I am in a season where I refuse to police my emotion so that people who are comfortable can stay comfortable. I think about Jesus, and when you think about his ministry, he seems to make people who are comfortable uncomfortable, and people who are vulnerable and marginalized, those are the people who he kind of brings to the center. Those are the people he has solidarity with. And it's not because he doesn't love the people who are comfortable. It's not that he doesn't love the religious establishment. It's not that he doesn't love the people. But when you are comfortable with systems that dehumanize people, we have to shake that up. Because I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I can't tell you how many times I have swallowed that I have kept my mouth closed because I don't want to be seen a certain way. Think about how dehumaning someone who is seeing racism. I have to watch myself in how I'm an angry black man. Well, guess what? George Floyd died last Monday night because of racialized ideas about black people. I was an angry black man, and I make no apology for that. Not because I'm racist, not because I'm mean-spirited, but because it's righteous indignation. It looks at the contradiction and says it ought not be, right? So let me just give you a couple examples. I could give you a lot. Let me just give you a couple examples of what I call the kind of subtle racism that takes place, that I call these the daily indignities of being black in America. I said earlier that I always wanted to be a leader in some capacity, whether it was politics or something. But in elementary school, middle school, and high school, I was always a leader in student body. In senior high or in high school, I became the battalion commander of our ROTC unit in our high school. We had about 250 cadets, and I was the commander of the battalion my senior year. Every commander up to that point, every commander ended up going into the military. Every single one. And all the commanders were black, really, because again, it was a predominantly black high school. But I remember as I was getting ready to graduate, the Navy recruiters were coming out, Army recruiters were coming out. But there was this particular Navy recruiter that came out, and we were talking. And he came to meet my mom and my family, and we were talking about my plans after high school. And I told him, I like to go in the military, but I would love to go and go to college and do an ROTC scholarship because I met all the criteria, had great grades.
Just real quickly, one of the things I'm working with young people is just allowing them to talk through things that they're observing, things that they're feeling right now, and to let them know that what they're feeling now is valid. And then another piece that I'm pushing on them is that you belong. One of the challenges that happens is that we are intimidated going into certain spaces or engaging in certain discussions or whatever. But I really try to push them to know that they belong. In whatever space God has placed them in, they belong there. And no one is higher than you, no one's lower than you, you belong there. And so those are two pieces that I'm really trying to push to encourage them to take hold of their voice, because they, and know that their voices are heard, and that they are just as, their voice and their words or their voices and their pain or their struggle is just as valid as anyone else's. And so in my opportunities to work with young people, I do get a chance to share in that regard. And so that's how I've been working with young people and trying to process during these times. And then we're doing some additional pieces, but now it's an opportunity for all of us as people of faith to come together and really present how we can actually love God and love our neighbor. Here's a great opportunity. So we can either do it and fly and invite the kingdom of God, or we can screw it up like we've been doing it for the past couple thousand years. So that's my prayer, and I'm really pushing prayer in a number of congregations and groups, because we really do need the power of the divine to help us move past all these obstacles. So thanks for letting me join this. I look forward to talking with you in the future. Prashant, I need to send you a couple of notes. So God bless you all. Peace, blessings, and I'll check you out. Be safe, and be wise.
Thank you.
Later.
Thank you, Pastor Chase.
Yeah, it might help if I unmute, right? I shouldn't have laughed at Leon earlier.
See, gotcha.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I left off earlier, as far as the last thing that you guys may have heard, but I was just sharing a couple instances that both happened when I was in high school, where I was on the receiving end of racist behavior. One was in the context of a police officer. But the gist of all of that is for me right now, when I deal with young people, whether it's Jordan or anyone his age in their 20s or even early 30s, is to really help people understand history a bit better. I do believe that we live in a time in which people believe myths about our country, myths about the church, myths about racism. And there are just daily indignities that people deal with that we're to a point now where we have to stop tiptoeing around this stuff and just be honest about it. And so for me, that's the big deal. I think it was Pastor Jay who talked about the importance of prayer. I'm spending a lot of time asking, what does it look like for us to pray and to act? I think about Jeremiah 29, when the people are sent to exile in Babylon, and God makes it very clear through the prophet, there's no going back. You're not going back to the way things were. You're going to Babylon. Seek the welfare of the city and pray for it. Shalom, justice. What does the church look like when it has a voice that says the image of God in the world is being contradicted daily in American life? Not because America is exceptional, but because America is built on and has a foundation of racism and white supremacy. And so to ignore all of that, to me, it's going to be very, very hard to heal that if we're not even honest about what we're dealing with, right? So for me, I'm in a different place where I'm not militant. And I think we've been talking a little bit about being militant. I think people like Malcolm X, I don't actually think Malcolm X was that militant. It's just he spoke truth in a way that wasn't concerned about how it was received on white ears.
Yeah.
He didn't spend time trying to accommodate people in their comfort. He just wasn't interested in that. So it sounded rough, but it wasn't that he was unloving. In fact, we know he deeply loved elements of what this country could be, but he wasn't interested in placating and acting like the issues were not real. He hit those things head on. So for me, with young people, yes, we need to have spiritual practices so that we're not overcome by the very hate and the kind of subtle racism that we have to kind of deal with. We don't want to become bitter and mean and angry. but we do have to be honest about our anger. We need to be honest about lamenting. And I'll stop on this. But one thing that's good for this season right now is for the church to pick back up the ancient practice of lament. Instead of just arguing, instead of just fighting, lamentation, lamenting, being honest, going on record in our prayers, in our communal lives, in our spiritual practice, where we are honest about what the truth is on the ground, that we can say, God, save us from the way things are, help us to see, and to be honest about what we see. When we see an officer's knee on a man's neck for little under 9 minutes, and we actually have to have a conversation about whether or not racism is a big deal in American life. I mean, we should lament the fact that the majority of our country can't see that. You know, those are the kind of things that we're talking about. So when I say radical truth telling, I don't mean being mean-spirited. I don't mean, oh, you know, let's not care about people's feelings. All I'm saying, though, is why is it that people like me, who are on the underbelly of society by no other reason than the color of my skin, why do I always have to be mindful of the feelings of white folks who claim to love me? Why do I have to be mindful about their feelings while I sit here in my own pain, and the only people who seem to get it are people who look like me? Proximity is important. If you're white and you do proximity with me, we need to be able to have this conversation, because if we can't, Martin Luther King Jr., I think he was accurate. That means we're settling for a false peace, which is the absence of justice, which is the absence of the beloved community. If we are the beloved community, Prashant and guys, that means we have to be willing to go to the uncomfortable place, knowing that there's no way forward except through this season. We can't skip it. We can't avoid it. And again, and the funny thing is, we don't have to put the Bible aside to do that. Like Martin Luther King Jr., like Fannie Lou Hamer, and all these other wonderful folks that we are standing on their shoulders. The Bible calls that when the facts on the ground contradict the purposes of God, we have to be honest and not in denial. We have to tell the truth. We have to grieve it, but we also have to reimagine what the new world could look like. And I think for me, that's the thing. I'm trying to have a vision of what the world could actually be, what the country could actually be, and that actually becomes the foundation of how I engage. Because I have a vision of people being together and coming together. That means that I don't settle for a false peace. That means I work really, really hard to help us to kind of have the kind of communities where we don't have to, you know, I don't have to leave my blackness at the door to be able to have peace. You know what I mean? I don't have to leave my experience at the door in order for me to have peace. That I can bring that with me and be honest about it, so that we can be honest with each other, and then love and learn and grow and look and repent and be a part of repairing and creating something new in which we can give people something to look forward to.
I will say this. If there's a shift of power, if the white evangelical church does not react now, the power that they seek to hold will be diminished tremendously. Okay, so because there's so many thoughtful people, so many intelligent people that have been raised where we kind of have to be third culture people, that the future is designed for people with that modality. And so if there is no action, if there's no the name brand people in that space, if at this point you cannot understand the nuances between the fact that people are protesting and that there are other people that are doing things that are more sinful, possibly, we look at looting, but that does not negate the reason that we're protesting. Amen. If you do not get that now, and if you do not take action, and you say that you believe in the risen Jesus, and you do nothing now, the reason that you don't speak out, the reason that you don't do anything, if it's linked to power, that very power you seek to hold, you lose. Mm-hmm. And the time is now. You don't need to go read another book. Read your Bible.
Come on, man.
You don't need to go. I mean, it's like, so looking at the past, and that's why it's kind of hard for me, because it's like, I don't need to be taught again what I've been seeing for the last 35, 40 years of my life.
There you go.
You know, every single day, I have to interpret every interaction through a very complex system of lenses. And I started having to do this at 10 years old. Every single day. So while we're trying to explain to you that systemic racism exists, part of the systemic racism is that I have to keep explaining it to you. Part of the reason that you don't know what white privilege is because you have white privilege. Part of the reason that you get upset, people get upset or offended by white privilege, is because you can't even grasp. So the pain points you're having are based on the idea that you've never had to suffer with some of the things that we deal with every day. And so I think what you're going to see is if you don't make it a point to repent from the sins of the forefathers, you may not have slept, you may not, but what you may not have done the things that the people that created the system have done, but you can repent in their place, even in your heart. But then the second thing is really important: turn from their wicked ways. Okay. Man. If that's so they're like, I didn't do all that, but you didn't do all that. But if you can see where the injustice is. And the thing about it is, this reason I have my patience is waning about this. And when I say my patience is waning, it's not about me getting to the point to where I'm going to do something militant, but it's like, you can only keep explaining the same thing over and over again, where we have case studies of people being choked out on camera, multiple things. You're also hearing the people say the same thing. Like, how often is it this is not reality TV. Like, you're literally, several years ago, a man said, I can't breathe, and he's been choked and killed. All right. On the other side of the country, he's in another position against the cement. Same thing is happening there. We engage with every name brand. This is a very important thing. Every name brand, white evangelical leader, we specifically connected with them after a young man went into one of the oldest Black churches in America, sat down, experienced their hospitality, and then murdered these people. Those people went on national television and forgave this young man that killed these innocent people. And you have still not spoken up. And I've heard personally from many of the name brand people. So if you didn't stand up then, if you didn't understand institutional racism then, how I don't understand. And you're seeing videos of people, and we're still saying that some have said this is not my problem. All right. But the problem is you have to look at this as a witness of Jesus, the Christ. The institution of Christianity in America is on trial. When you have African Americans, when we learned in bondage, y'all correct me because y'all the preachers, but when we learned in bondage how to read, and there was different versions of slave Bibles or different types of Bibles that we weren't able to read, but when we started reading this gospel for ourselves,
yes, sir.
And that book told us that we started seeing ourselves and some of the other people that were oppressed in the Bible, and we saw that we were not supposed to be slaves. And that gospel transformed us, and we still hold on to that. So the gospel that we learned, we still hold on to the faith, even though that same faith gave us our liberation.
Yeah.
So there is a depth and understanding about the transformative power of Jesus that we have in our community. And if you can't, and if we have to keep explaining this at some point, so what I learned through these other things is that the only hope I had initially was in helping your children understand. But there are people waking up. But I just want to say, the time, I mean, because it's a global situation, because the power structures are shifting. If it takes for you to listen to us, someone in the global South, a visionary in the global South, the only way you're going to listen to me when all of the wealth and power that came, when Mississippi was a Silicon Valley of its day because of cotton and exports.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people that are claimed to be Christian. So you have an intimate knowledge of African-American culture, intimate knowledge of the disparities that happen. And it's really clear that wealth was transformed from generation to generation. If you can't figure that out, if it takes Global United, it takes Prashan in the global South to tell you something's not right in America, and you still don't do anything,
Come on.
you need to talk to Jesus about that.
Come on.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's anyway. I didn't mean to get so amped. I was telling jokes earlier.
But it got real.
I think it's a trigger because it's like, okay, what about the past and the present? It's like I have so many options where I could tell you so many different scenarios. Like like you've been pulled over and over again. You know how to hold your hands and how to ask. All of us on this call know what it's like when you get pulled over and you look into that rearview mirror and you watch the cop unclip his gun.
Mm-hmm. As he's walking towards you.
As he's walking up to you. And you know that if you see another cop car come, you know that it's escalating, and you know that information before it even, you don't even know why they pulled you over.
Mm-hmm.
When they pull you over, you have to know how to be careful on how to find out why they pulled you over.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been like, and so here's the thing: when we watch someone get strangled on video or watch someone get shot, and they're clearly unarmed, the reason why that is mind blowing us because we know how easily that could happen to us.
Yeah.
Every time, I mean, when I pass the police and they look at me, I know. I mean, they're just trying to figure it out now. And the thing about it is, not all police are not terrible. And you know how I know? Because I can read them when they pull me over and they walk up to me. You know what kind of cop you're dealing with.
Yep.
Like I literally look at them, and when I say sir, them, the way they respond back to me lets me know who they are. Because they'll usually respond back and say sir to me, but I watch them, they might come to me and they're handshaking.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about this is somebody that could shoot me.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I'm saying? It's just, it's a thing where, but once again, I have all types of friends, all types of culture. I mean, I learned a lot about, the thing that really helped me is when I lived in India for 2 years. Because when I lived in India for 2 years, I started seeing that any culture or any ethnicity, any race, that race is basically a historical construct. So when you're in India, caste system, all these different things, start analyzing that, looking at colonialism there, and you can almost kind of look at what happened with colonialism in India and then look at what's happening in the US, look at Jim Crow versus caste. It's not the same thing, but there's some very similar things working. And so that sort of thing has helped me look at this from a global context. But then it also helps me realize, wait, like if we want Christianity as Jesus followers, we want to have fidelity globally, that we've got to get these basic things right, because in many cases, the priests were dropping in with the people that were operating with manifest destiny, imperialism. A lot of that stuff is intertwined, and it's time for us to pull those things apart, so that when our president gets up on television and says what he says, people aren't saying that's what Christians think. They need to be able to separate and say, okay, that's politics.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not the Jesus that Prashan serves. That's the Jesus. That's something else. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but a lot of it, if you don't make the move now, the power you want to have, the power, the reasons that you're trying to hold on, and the fatigue that you have around it, it's going to go anyway. So the opportunity now is to take action swiftly and wisely, because I'm telling you, the power is shifting, and this is not. I want to be clear. This is not a threat. I'm telling you, this is more of a prophetic thing for you. Yes. But it's I would call it prophetic, but it's so obvious. But the reason you can't see is because you've never had to, you're in the power space, you know, but if you don't wake up from your sleep now, you'll miss an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
I get excited to speak, but then I have no words because I feel like every time my brothers speak, I don't even, like, I have never met these men before. And I feel like I've known you since the day I was born.
Yeah.
Like, this is, and the sad reality is we are not discussing the beauties of our culture. We are not discussing the celebratory nature of the voices of African American people. We are not discussing the beauty of dance as it flows out of our culture. We are discussing pain. And I can finish your sentences. And we are from different parts of the country. I had a guy that is a believer. I say that because he says it. I think that we're supposed to judge a tree by its fruit. And I'm not going to go around seeing which Christians are and aren't. I just think that sometimes when your fruit displays something different, it actually shows that maybe you might not be truly a part of the faith that you profess. But there was a brother who did something that has stunned me and hurt me deeply, because the overt racism, like, I get, but it's actually the wave of subtle racism that actually is more painful for me than the overt stuff. Because the overt stuff is like, oh, cool, three points, quick response. The subtle stuff, though. So this guy, he writes a lament, and he says, oh man, like, how I wish that the officer would have just removed his knee. Wouldn't it have been cool if one of the other guys had just come alongside him and say, hey man, like, slide off his neck? Wouldn't it have been okay if, like, and it was this, like, softness, sadness, but in the entire lament, he never mentioned that the man was black. Never mentioned, even in laments, like the beauty of lament is that it is passionate. In the passion and your anger and your frustration, you bring it to the one who can do something about it. You bring it to a holy, beautiful, loving God, but it is not the same as some of the other aspects that you find in Psalms. And so to see this man invoke privilege in even the style of worship that somehow, while my whole nation is responding, and many people who aren't even Jesus lovers are saying, say his name. What's his name? George Floyd. As I was on a march yesterday, people who don't even want to have anything to do with the church, to find a lament that is absence of color and of the name of this man. I liken it to someone like saying, I'm a Christian and I'm saved, but not liking it to Jesus actually going through a torturous experience for my salvation. Like you've got to understand what Jesus went through to understand salvation. You can't have lament if you don't even acknowledge my color and this man's name. And so, fam, it is subtle racism like that keeps re-traumatizing me. As you asked, Prashant, like, how am I dealing with trauma? I can't deal with trauma. I can't deal with it because every time I deal with it, there's another wave of subtle racism that says, and yet you are not valued in the same way as everyone else. I guarantee you, if George Floyd had been this pastor's actual brother, I bet he would have said his name. I bet he would have spoken of some more characteristics of the situation than just, oh, would have been nice if someone had tapped him on the shoulder and said, could you move your knee? that just it whitewashes the gospel, man. And we've got to be careful of even in our excuse me, the white church has to be careful of even in its attempt to show solidarity that it do so from a vulnerable and real and a contrite place that shows depth. If you just give me a 10-second, 20-second prayer for George Floyd and you went on preaching about Romans 3, like you missed it. You've missed it. An entire community is rocked, and you went on with business as usual, or you tried to give a shallow attempt at identifying with my pain. And to be honest, you can save it. Like I'd rather you come deep and come real, as messy as this is going to be. Yes, you might get some stuff wrong, but in an attempt to come deep and come real, that I can deal with. But saving face and to many and in many ways, like speaking the triggers that soften the blow for white people. So here's some triggers. Man, we're against wrong cops because we know, and then the next 15 minutes is an explanation of how good cops are. 30 seconds of bad cops, 15 minutes of how good cops are, and we stand. One trigger. Trigger number two. Yes, because we know that he wasn't a perfect man and that he had some problems in his past, but he didn't deserve this. So now somehow the brother's rap sheet gets brought into church service, and then 2 seconds, but he didn't deserve this. What? Like, can you trigger my people? Trigger the Black experience for a minute and err on the side of calling out injustice for way longer than you err on the side of justifying privilege. Those are some simple takeaways, because I know that I'm speaking to people who may not experience or come into a Black church, or even a multicultural church, multi-ethnic church, multiracial church that has Black leadership, or even has a Black voice that gets to sit at the table and actually speak. And to my people who are in that spot, let me just be clear. I feel for you, because as my brother John has said, for you to take the risk means you might not feed your child. You may be fired for being spoken up as to the depths of this pain in white spaces. I know, because I'm one of them. My church is diverse and I feel tight about my church, but many of the amazing things we do in our community is based on some of the partners we have outside the community. And I foresee some of those partners all of a sudden having new missional directions they're going to be going in. It's a risk, but family, we gotta. I'm supposed to have a neat bow on the end of that. I love y'all. I love the church, and I'm saying these things because I want the white church to be prophetic in this moment. But I'm also saying these things because I'm mad that I feel the pain of these men, and that their descriptions, that my name could now be Art Hooker. My name could be James Carter. My name could be David Rameau. My name could be John Lincoln. My name could be Brother Gardner, was it? Sorry, who left earlier. I'm mad that that's the case. But Prashant, thank you for this, brother.
The purpose is, if you see this and you're moved by it, but you're stopping there, you even acknowledge it. But if you stop there, you might as well never acknowledge it in the first place. We're needing change. We're needing action. This is not the liberal media trying to brainwash you. This is not the initiative of a political party trying to tell you wrong. This is no conspiracy. This is your own people who've never met each other sharing from the depths of their heart and completing each other's sentences because their story is the same. If that doesn't reveal to you structural racism and injustices that need to be corrected now, I don't know what will. And that is the mandate of a new generation. Whatever happened in the past is different, but what will you do now? And that is the key thing. You know, there were good people during slavery who did nothing about it. There were good people during Jim Crow laws who did nothing about it. But now the question is, what will the good people today do about it? And don't try to wiggle your way out of an uncomfortable situation and hoping it'll go away and hoping that you'll find a way to look good in this, because none of us look good. We're all sinners. But to acknowledge it and say, Lord, how do I change this legacy? And not be known for living through that and doing nothing and trying to find a cheap way to justify all this and move forward.
I'm sitting here, it's amazing how, even though we all have the same story or similar stories, how much we could still learn and grow from hearing the next man's story. I'm just full right now listening to everyone here. And I think in this period, it's caused me to go back and just do soft reading on just some historical things, you know. And you look at the fact that, you know, for 400 some odd years, we've been here as a demographic of people, and we're still facing this challenge. And I looked at the fact, if you look at the fact that slavery was abolished when 1860s, early 1860s, and directly after that, because slavery was, how was there still Jim Crow? You know what I mean? It was just like, there was still Jim Crow even after slavery was abolished, you know, for almost 80 years. And so at the tail end of the Jim Crow, it's just, you go into this systemic thing, you know what I mean? That was, you know, I guess not as blatant, but is still as effective, every bit as effective, you know what I mean? Where, you know, the school supplies in the Black neighborhoods are different, or diminished, you know, in terms, and I experienced that firsthand. The job opportunities, the food supplies, it's just so many different ways to look at everything. And I've had some discussions with some friends of mine as of late, white friends who are really friends of mine. I know they love me. And I've had to explain to them the, I guess for lack of a better way, the mindset, I should say, behind rioting and the riots and the looting. And it was a sincere question I got from a friend of mine. He was like, I understand like the protesting and, you know, I get where that comes from, but I can't wrap my mind around why people choose to loot. And I had to share with him, you are talking about a demographic of people who live, serve, and contribute to our way of life, our country, our cities. And the system that is supposed to protect everyone does not protect us, does not serve us justice. And it's being plastered on television how it's failing us over and over again, and nothing is changing. So you have a group of people who are not being heard, so we're acting out. Again, I don't want the grocery stores to be looted. I don't want the drug stores to be looted. And, you know, I consume those places as well. But this is a result of a people who have not been heard. And this is how we're reacting. This is how this group of people is reacting. We have to disrupt your everyday life for you to listen to us. It's like, look, stop what you're doing. This is wrong. This is not cool. And so he said, man, he called me a couple of days later and he had a chance to process that. And he went to work and he shared that with a lot of his friends. He was like, man, it totally opened my eyes. I never looked at it that way. Until I spoke with you, I would have never understood it that way. And I was just thankful to be able to have that dialogue with him. Art said something that really resonated with me. When you look at this from the Christianity standpoint, and just the whole idea of just the leadership that's in place. And he said it's not so much about it being a threat, about the shifting of power. It's just, I just really feel like God is fed up. I feel like God on his throne is fed up. And maybe this is just me, but I've seen a pattern where God, because he loves us, will cover us in our shortcomings for a period of time. You know, he's given us grace. He'll cover us like, okay, you shouldn't be doing that. And I could put you out there, but I'm gonna give you grace. I'm gonna give you time to get it together. You know, and we may be sorry in that moment, you know, and we may be repentant in that moment, but then we go back to our regular mode of action. And God is still looking at us like, hey, you know, I thought we were gonna deal with this. You know, he gives us grace, but then when he's fed up, he exposes you.
Yeah.
He exposes you. And I feel like that's what is happening right now. Again, in our legal system, and in our schools, in our churches, from the local level to the global level, I've seen some things even in my local church experience where I just feel like God wanted a shifting in the leadership, in the way that the leadership was geared towards engaging, you know, the congregation and the work that the church should be doing. And there were some things that were exposed, you know what I mean? And there were some things that were put out in the forefront in order to break up. Leadership can be a stronghold.
Come on.
If you sit in that place so long and you have that access to power and you're not consistently humbling yourself and going before the Lord to keep you focused, to keep you humble, it can become a stronghold because you don't want to let go of that power. You know what I mean? And so I think with that also comes the possibility of, you know, those things being perverted. And when God gets fed up, he exposes us. You know what I mean? And in that exposure is also the position for things to shift. And I just really believe that that's what's going on right now, like on the local church level, and then now with everything that's happening on a global level, because, you know, it just, we can't continue this way, man. I'm sitting, I'm watching this pattern happen for the past, was it 7-8 years now? We've been looking at like video footage of guys getting shot, getting killed. You know, I mean, innocent men, unarmed men.
Sometimes running away.
Oh my God. It's just like over and over again. And sometimes, you know, the guys are getting taps on the wrist, you know, as a repercussion of that. And, you know, I just, as a black man driving down the street, I've been pulled over. It's just, I'm almost conditioned to the possibility of being pulled over. But then there's also the thought when I see this over and over again, and Lord forbid, you can't help but to think, is this my turn to become that martyr for the cause? You know what I mean? You see those lights flashing, and it's just you're automatically, as a black man, conditioned to, okay, let me make sure I don't move too quickly. Let me make sure my hands are, you know what I mean? And it's just, you know, and I was explaining the same thing to the same buddy. It's like, for the most part, I don't feel like you guys have that experience. When you see police driving down the street, you may think, oh man, I'm glad that we have detail. I'm thinking, oh man, I hope he doesn't bother me. You know what I mean? And that's bad. And again, I know everyone isn't like that. I have family members and friends who are law enforcement. Everyone isn't like that. And I'm trying to condition myself to see a person before I see a badge. And I would just hope that they condition themselves to see a person before they see a black man or a potential threat. You know, it's all conditioning. It's all conditioning. And I'm hopeful because of this conversation we're having, and I'm hopeful because, again, it took a South Asian man to bring this situation together. You know, I feel like in this day and age, things aren't so polarized. I feel like the racial lines, if not erased, are being smeared. You know what I mean? I've had a lot of my friends, again, my white friends, call me in sincerity. You know what I mean? And so that, I think that's the difference in now and as opposed to 50, 60 years ago. But I just think we need to, as everyone was saying, I think we need to build on this momentum and make sure wherever we're serving, you know, whatever ministries we're serving in, whatever capacities we're serving in, that it's an ongoing work. This is a work in progress. It's not like, you know, say the verdict is what we all think it should be. That's not the end of the journey. You know what I mean? There's work to be done. And again, we all know what it is because we experience it. Now it takes our brothers who come from a different walk of life to join in this walk with us. You know what I mean? And that's just, I'm encouraged because I do have friends who sincerely want to see change and sincerely feel for me right now and feel for the Black community. But my prayer is that we again, it's easy to feel prompted or motivated in a specific moment or season, but we all let things go by the wayside sometimes, you know, or a lot of times. So I'm just praying that the work is consistent, man, and that there are deliberate motions made towards this stuff, you know. Yeah, that's.
Thank you once again for these amazing insights and for willing to be part of this conversation. I know it's a difficult time, but for you to be willing to engage, willing to speak, it means so much to us as a movement, but also to everybody who's listening. In closing, I'd like to ask this question from all of you. Is, given these incidents, and given what's happening, but also your entire life of experiencing systematic racism, what's going through your mind right now? And what would you like to share with those who are listening? How would you call them to action? But at the same time, especially for the younger generation, from either side of the racial divide or whatever background they're from, it'd be interesting for you to hear your suggestions to them. So I'll let you take that and run with it. So over to you.